We are delighted to say that we are joined on the other line by Lou Macari. Good evening, Lou.
Good evening.
Thanks very much for joining us. And it's actually, first of all, I wanted to start to talk to you about the would you call it a film or a live story, which is on tomorrow evening, called Marvellous on BBC Two. Do you want to tell the viewers how that came about, Lou, in terms of making the film itself?
Well, I got a call from a producer, and he said he wanted me to speak to me about Neil Baldwin, my kit manager at Stoke. So I spoke to him for about an hour, and then it went to 2 hours and 3 hours, and told him a few stories of what went on at Stoke. And I probably thought that was the last I would see of Peter Bowker. And got a call about 2 weeks after it, and Peter said he wanted to come back and see me with a director called Julian Farino. And the two of them came and met me in Stoke and sat down for probably longer than the time before and talked about Neil Baldwin, my kit manager, and the two of them went away after that, and I definitely thought that's the last I'll hear of them, but they rang me to say we're going to make a drama about Neil. 90 minutes it's going to be. For 90 minutes we're going to tell the story of Neil Baldwin, who went from being a circus clown to my kit manager at Stoke.
We saw the clips. We are going to show a clip of it very soon, actually, but Tony Curran, who plays you as well, I mean, first of all, that must have been a surprise, because I suppose in real life he never looked anything like you, but in the film he does.
Well, I saw Tony at... some of it was filmed at Crewe, and I saw Tony for the first time there, and he told me he'd been trying to practice my accent, because he's got a Scottish accent, but mine was slightly different. And he asked me, he said a few words, and he asked me how I thought he had done, and I thought, well, fantastic, but I was still waiting to see the real thing when it was, produced and on camera. And I went to a premiere in London about 4 weeks ago. I was probably more nervous sitting at that premiere I'd ever been in any football match I'd played in, but I was sitting there nervous, and I was shaking at one stage, and then when the lights went down, I just didn't know what to expect. But I've got to say, what I saw, I was pleasantly surprised.
And is it pretty much like the clip, Lou, in as much that Neil Baldwin obviously was outside Stoke City football ground, you go to your car, you come back, and then you sort of ask what he's doing, and then sort of on the spot you'd offered him the job as kit man?
That was it. I mean, that's exactly... Everything in the film, every single thing in the film is the way it happened at Stoke. It's all true. And that clip you've just mentioned, yeah, he was at the ground. I went into work, first day at work, and I came out about 5 or 6 hours later, and it was pouring the rain, and he was still there. And I said to him, why aren't you at work? And he told me he just had the sack at the circus. And I thought, right. And I was just thinking there and looking at it at the same time. And then I did my Simon Cowell. I said to him, I like you. There's something about you. And I then offered him a job at Stoke, and I said, can you report Monday morning at 9 o'clock? And then I think that's where we'll leave it and let people watch the rest tomorrow night.
And I guess, people would sort of wonder, well, that happened back in the 90s, do you still see him? But apparently you do. Obviously you still live in Stoke, and you still see him from time to time. I
see him quite a lot, and he's at all the Stoke games, and he sort of sits outside holding court before the game starts, and then he gets into, watch the game. But he's a real character, and the reason it makes him a real character is he's very funny, but he doesn't know he's funny. He's very loyal, which is something that, if you've got that in football nowadays, it's worth its weight in gold. And he's an all-round fantastic man, and I'm delighted it's happened for him. And I do really believe that everyone who watches it tomorrow night on BBC Two at 9 o'clock will enjoy it. And it's the way football clubs used to be. Now, whoever you've got in the studio there, if they're connected with a football club, ask them to watch it and see whether they prefer it the way it was back then or the way it is now. And the way it was back then was you could talk to the players, everyone mixed with the crowd. It was a great place to be a football club. The way it is now is, well, let's say, slightly different.
And I mean, very much so. I mean, we've got Gary Mabbott on the show later on as well. We're talking about the big rivalry derby coming up, and it's a different game altogether now, Lou, isn't it? It's more all about the money side of things now, unfortunately. And like you said before, people that lived in the area could relate to their football club, and you could get an autograph signed, or you could get something mentioned in the programme. But now it's far more difficult, and that's what enlightens people, I guess, to that era of the 70s, 80s, and indeed the 90s.
Yeah, I mean, that for me is a disappointing thing about nowadays. I mean, I'm at Old Trafford every home game, and I do Manchester United television, but the things you're talking about there, where the fans were very close to the football club, and in this, in this drama as well, you'll see the fans chanting for Neil Baldwin. You'll see the fans, singing all sorts of songs about him, because he was them and they were him, and they were all part of the football club. But nowadays, as you just described very well, I must say, you can't get near a football club. It's just ridiculous, and your press officers and somebody else, and if you want to speak to somebody, you've got to go through this department. Didn't have to do that back at Stoke in the early 90s, and I think this drama will show that, and I think it'll be left up to people themselves to take a view whether they preferred it back then or whether they prefer it now. I certainly know what I prefer. OK,
Lou, can we just keep on the phone for about 40 seconds? We're going to play the clip and then we'll come back to you, maybe talk a bit of Manchester United. A couple of guys want to talk about the question as well about the film, but we're just going to play the clip. Just stay on the line, please, Lou.
OK, no problem.
Thank you.
I'm a friend of the Archbishop of Canterbury.
What are you qualified to do?
Manage Stoke City, or be a vicar.
What exactly does it entail, this job?
There aren't many mums who'd let their sons run off to join the circus. Welcome to Keele University.
You can't just get things by asking.
I can. Is Tony Benn in today?
How'd you fancy coming to work for me? Kit man.
Toby Jones.
I've always wanted to be happy.
In the network premiere.
So I decided to be.
What's the Neil Baldwin Football Club?
My own team.
I'm just the club president.
Marvellous. On BBC Two and BBC Two HD.
Thank you, Lou. We were just playing the clip which leads up to the programme. We've got a couple of guys on the panel. One's an AFC Wimbledon fan and one's a Palace fan. You got any questions for Lou about that?
Yeah, Lou, a bit more of a football-related question. Just with regards to Stoke, obviously the team we've been talking about a little bit there. Mark Hughes has really transformed them. Last year, obviously, he had a tough job coming in, replacing Tony Pulis. He really transformed them. Had a good season. How do you think that transition's gone? And do you think Mark is given the recognition for the job he's done?
Well, it was always going to be difficult after Tony, because Tony did so well for Stoke, and my biggest surprise was when they departed company, because he'd got them into the Premier League, he kept them there season after season, and no matter what people said about Stoke, they were tough to beat, and they weren't going to go out of that Premier League without a real fight, and that's still the case. Mark's come in, they haven't lost that fighting spirit. He's tried to add to it one or two different types of players than Tony signed. Tony went for the sort of tried and trusted and those that he could rely on week in, week out to make sure that they stayed in the Premier League. And I just hope Stoke don't get carried away a little bit and start to believe that they can bust, they can break into the top 6 or 7, because that is so difficult to do. The main aim for any of those clubs, and that applies to Crystal Palace where Tony went next, you've got to stay in the Barclays Premier League. That's the first achievement.
Definitely.
And it is an achievement, and if people lose sight of that being an achievement, you'll soon get yourself in trouble and you may get relegated. So Stoke haven't, they've changed a little bit, but still the aim, and I said it in the local paper when I do a column, still the main aim at the start of the season has got to be Premiership football next season. Make sure you don't get in trouble. And Mark has signed 2 or 3 players I'm sure will keep them well out of trouble and possibly halfway up the league.
I think it's a very fair assessment of about 14 teams in the Premier League there, Lou. I think I can completely agree with you. Wise words.
Yeah, hi,
thank you.
Yeah, switching to your other team, Man United, very contrasting season so far. You win against QPR and then you go down to Leicester. What's happening at United? I mean, from your perspective, is it more about getting more funds, more players, or is there something in the background that's not quite right?
Well, I didn't get carried away after the QPR game. Joe Jordan was a pal of mine, and he's on the staff at QPR, and we were talking before the game about QPR versus Manchester United, and he said, well, it's a little bit of a mismatch, isn't it? With no disrespect to his own players, United have spent 180 million or whatever it is, and QPR have spent very little and have come up from the Championship. And that's the way it was on the day. It wasn't so much, Manchester United been absolutely brilliant, but they needed a result to get back on track. They got that result, but probably 1 or 2 people got carried away a little bit. But I was always worried about the lack of defenders being brought in during the transfer window. The people like Rio Ferdinand and Vidic and Patrice Evra, who they had lost, at the end of the season, These are top players. These are players that you can't afford to sort of lose without trying to replace them with similar type players. And well, they didn't bring any defenders in, so we started the season. Luke Shaw came in rather, and he was injured, so we started the season with Tyler Blackett in there, a young lad who's got great potential but has never played at the top level. So he was thrown into the team. Johnny Evans in the team, then got injured. Phil Jones got injured, and I was always concerned about the defence. I've got to say that I didn't expect them to lose 5 goals at Leicester, and I couldn't see that coming, but I did think that when we played the better teams, which is Chelsea and obviously the Liverpool and Arsenal and Man City and that, defensively we were going to maybe be found wanting a little bit because of a combination of lack of experience, players who were experienced leaving at the summer, and actually not bringing in a number of defenders to cover for those people. And I think it was there for all to see at Leicester. We were certainly found wanting at the back.
And do you think there's a danger? I mean, obviously a lot of money's been spent this year to try and get Manchester United in the Champions League. Do you see it as this is a case that could take 2 or 3 years? Obviously Liverpool are an example of that. Liverpool took longer to get back into the elite. Do you think Man United could be at the stage where they could end up not reaching the top 4 for the next 2 or 3 seasons?
No, I don't consider that. I mean, when we talk about the top 4 in the Barclays Premier League, we're talking about 4 from 6. And if Manchester United can't be in the top 4 in a league of 6 contenders for that, then there's something wrong. So Champions League, I've got to be honest with you, when we start talking concerning Manchester United being in the top 4, I don't really get excited. I get a little bit despondent when I think maybe round about Christmas like last season, we weren't in a position to go on and win the league. And if the same happens this season, and it's not that number 1 spot that we're aiming for, and not that number 1 spot we can get, then playing out the rest of the season when you've been used to being so different under Sir Alex, it's hard to take going for 4th spot. And I don't think it'll take a number of years to go for 4th or 3rd spot and get in the Champions League, but it might take a number of years to actually win the Barclays Premier League.
And you spoke very quickly. We'll talk about the era that you played, and you played 329 games, 78 goals.
401 games and 99 goals.
Oh, right, well, OK. That's bad research. I'll shoot the researcher. That was on the Wikipedia.
Sorry for that.
OK. Well, we're obviously talking about the derbies this week, and Everton playing Liverpool and Tottenham playing Arsenal. And there must have been some great games with Manchester City in the 80s, and memories of those.
Well, it goes back to an era in football where the lads in the studio will tell you it meant everything. It was win or bust, because it meant so much to the supporters. And as a player, you were in there and you were scrapping to get the better of, well, in our case, Man City and Liverpool and teams like that, and to be the number 1, team in Manchester. And when the Merseyside derbies came along, they were played at a ferocious pace, and the tackles were going in, and it was fast and furious. And that's changed nowadays. If there's a tackle in the game, everyone's screaming that someone should be sent off. So I think the football nowadays, and for the younger, supporters who can't remember or haven't seen back in the 70s and 80s and even the 90s, they won't have seen that type of football, and now they're getting used to a type of football where we spend probably half the time talking about people getting sent off, free kicks that weren't all that bad, fouls that weren't all that bad, refereeing decisions that the referees probably are forced to make nowadays. When you go back in time, you hardly seen the referee. So it's all changed, and I'll let you lads in the studio sort of decide whether it's all changed for the better or all changed for the worse.
I don't think it's changed for the better, to be honest with you. And in terms of the hardest defender that you came up against, I mean, you talk about Joe Jordan, obviously a great striker and a real hard man. I mean, was there a number of hard defenders that you came across that gave you one hell of a game?
Well, there was 2 defenders in my career that early on in my career, when I was in the younger stages, that I knew I was in for a real battle. One was Tommy Smith, who was quite unbelievable, and the other one was Peter Storey at Arsenal. Peter Storey was tough. Then we went on to Graham Souness and people like that. Jimmy Case, midfield players who could really put their foot in and leave you in no doubt they meant business. But there was a lot of hard players around then, and Is there any hard players around nowadays? I'm not so sure.
No, they're all pansies, aren't they, Lou? I can get away with saying that. Thanks very much indeed, Lou. And just to remind us before we go, can you just remind us what time the programme's on and where we can watch it tomorrow?
You can watch it on BBC Two at 9 o'clock. It's called Marvellous, and I'm hoping after you watch it, you've got that opinion that it was marvellous.
Okay.
And lastly, just before you go, can we get a prediction of the game against West Ham on Saturday?
Sorry, I couldn't hear that. Prediction against
West Ham on Saturday. What's your prediction for the game?
Well, I mean, the Hammers got a great result against Liverpool, but they're at Old Trafford, and as poor as United defence was last week, with all the firepower United have got, I think over 90 minutes the Hammers are going to find it tough. There might not be a great deal in it, but I'm expecting United to win by maybe a goal or 2 goals.
Okay, well, thanks very much for taking time out this evening. We look forward to watching the film tomorrow as well. Thank you very much indeed.
Lovely, lads. Thank you. Cheers.
Bye.